I'm not here to hand out medals. I'm here to walk the streets of an online city that never sleeps, where reputation is currency, private rooms are back rooms, and the scoreboard is a billboard that watches you blink. Tonight we open the old files and read the place the way it reads us. The lore insists on one simple insult. Nobody here is original. Every voice, every habit, every kind of chaos is a reflection cast from 5 founding silhouettes: Jim, White Cheese, Billy Shears, ChillBro, and Gary. No hybrids, no fence, sitting. The city stamps you, then dares you to live up to it in public. Here's the map. Jim is motion conviction, charisma, and the nerve to steer a room. White Cheese is the boulevard engine instigation, performance clicks, and the grin that says, watch this. Billy Shears is the studio light creative, emotional, impatient, easily bent by the room's temperature. ChillBro is the locked, ledger, analytic, calculating, organized, and never forgetful. Gary is the canal, bench pleasant, quirky, along for the ride, the energy that makes the city feel human. What follows isn't a biography reel. It's a territory audit. Each person gets their own file, how they move, what rooms they haunt, the alliances they attract, and the kind of fallout they leave behind. If the record is thin, we read silhouette and gravity instead of inventing scandals. If the record is loud, we let it echo, without repeating its exact lines. The gym district is where rooms become movements. It's neon leadership. People who can walk into a thread like it's a council chamber, set direction, and make others feel chosen for showing up. Their charisma builds towers. Their conviction draws borders on the map. The Pantwan doesn't enter a room. He reprograms it. Conversations marching in a straight line take a hard left the moment his shadow hits the chat light. In the gym district, that kind of derailment isn't a mistake. It's proof of gravity. People orbit him because he makes the night feel like something is about to happen. The archive also shows the cost of that charm. When he points, people move, sometimes faster than ethics can keep up. Old controversies cling to his name like smoke in a coat lining. Not details we'll relitigate here, but the kind of collateral the city remembers. Even so, his influence shaped the lanes everyone else still drives in. Pantwan's legacy is a hard lesson. Leadership isn't always clean, but it is always visible. Being first mover becomes a permanent tattoo in this city. It is the reason certain alliances form quicker, certain jokes land harder, and certain newcomers learn immediately that a room can be taken from you in a single, well-timed entrance. Sonia runs her territory like a pop-up stage built in the middle of traffic. She shows up, drops a new bit, and suddenly 5 corners of the city are arguing about it at once. The gym in her isn't about being liked, it's about being followed, even by the people who swear they can't stand her. Her record reads like invention with consequences. She doesn't just start commotion, she recruits it. When her energy hits the right people, chemistry turns into a chain reaction, edits get made, alliances get tested, and the city's mood swings on her timing. Whether the room rallies for her or against her, it still rallies. AngryPrince built his reputation the old way, with endurance, with words heavy enough to feel like bricks. The archive remembers an essay so long it became a landmark, something people referenced like a street address. That's a gym move, taking up space until the city redraws itself around you. Later, he ships mediums without dropping authority. Videos, commentary, that feeling that he can narrate the block and make you believe the block matters. Even when the file gestures at bigger circles, the core stays the same. He speaks with conviction, and the city listens. Sometimes to learn, sometimes to laugh, always to pay attention. CD Retro doesn't chase the spotlight. He builds a porch beside it and invites people over. He's the gym that comes with a soft voice, always making something, always folding his own crew into the wider city without needing to start a riot. His power looks casual, which is exactly why it holds. The file notes, personal quirks, the city turned into running graffiti, but none of that changes the placement. He's a builder. He integrates. He refreshes. He keeps the machine from freezing by staying loose while everyone else tightens their fists. Zion is the kind of gym whose strength is quiet until it isn't. The lore paints him with a blend of friendliness and authority. Someone who can drift near the Gary Promenade, then turn around and command a room without raising his voice. When he speaks, defenders appear like streetlights turning on in sequence. The record even crowns him with a wartime title from the Plague, Season Commissioner Energy, the myth of a man stepping up while everyone else panicked. Literal or symbolic, the effect is the same. He sets precedent. He makes people act like rules exist, and in an online city, that is power almost nobody can fake. Eileen reads like a character who walked off a script and decided to start writing the city instead. In the lore, her presence in the pop corner didn't feel like chatter. It felt like narrative. That's why she lands in gym territory. She doesn't just participate, she becomes a reference point. Paired with other strong personalities, she's described as capable of real damage, not by force, but by the way a well-told persona can tilt a crowd's emotions. The file mentions ideas that could have become fixtures, like a show that never quite became a permanent channel. Even unfinished, she made a room feel like an episode. The year hits the archive like an election. One day he's not on the street map, the next he's giving speeches at every corner promising new freedoms, new rules, a new order for the city's basement levels. It's textbook Jim. Leadership by proclamation, charisma by momentum, a movement spoken into existence. Then the file turns. The same hunger that builds a movement tries to own it. He lunges for the GM seat like it's a throne, moves too fast, and the city tests the grip. The record says he was removed quickly, a caution sign nailed to the district gate. The White Cheese Boulevard is loud by design. It's the public battleground where jokes are thrown like fireworks and feuds become street festivals. These are the entertainers and instigators, the ones who stir the pot just to see what color the steam turns, then grin when the crowd gathers. Ryder feels engineered for the boulevard, an instigator with enough gym voltage to actually make things happen, not just talk about them. He doesn't only poke, he scripts. He'll turn a throwaway moment into a storyline and watch the city chase it like a rumor with legs. The file tags him with a second name used by close associates, the kind of inside label that marks someone as known. It also notes the temper little glitches in the smile that turn into long-running beefs. White cheese energy isn't always friendly. It's combustible. Ryder's version burns slow, then burns long. When the city tells stories about prime instigators, Ryder gets mentioned like a vintage bottle, aged, potent, not for casual drinking. He's proof. The boulevard can produce craftsmen, not just hecklers. He knows exactly where to stand, so the crowd tilts without noticing the floor moved. Muscle Man 4 is what happens when you take Billy's frantic creativity and bolt it to White Cheese's appetite for smoke. He can keep a bit alive long after it should have been buried, drag it down the boulevard like a parade float with busted wheels daring anyone to call time of death. That persistence is his territory. Some call it exhausting, others call it commitment. Either way, it keeps the street looking at him, keeps the conversation unable to move on. In White Cheese Land, durability is its own dominance, and he's built for it. A Lego Yoda reads like a missing street legend, the kind people bring up with a sigh like, you had to be there. Unpredictable, mouthy, occasionally brilliant. The archive doesn't frame him as consistent, it frames him as an asset you can't plan around, which is exactly why the city loved him. He taught plenty of smoke, but he also delivered, sometimes out of nowhere, something genuinely special. That's prime White Cheese, performance with teeth. When the community needs a reminder that chaos can still be craft, his file is the one you pull out and set on the table. Aleyna's file doesn't read like ordinary smack talk. It reads like pursuit. She's the boulevard's dirty spark, the kind of instigator who doesn't just argue, but hunts for leverage and shows up with receipts, energy that makes people check the locks on their private rooms. The lore frames her as the kind of counterpart the boulevard rarely gets. Humor with shadow, patience for games near zero, willingness to meddle near infinite. It's painted like a missed alignment, two matching instincts that never fully synced. In an online territory war, timing is everything, and her timing left scorch marks. Under the theatrics, what makes her White Cheese is simple. She treats the city like a stage where the worst thing you can do is be boring. She rigs narratives the way others rig brackets, by force of attention. Once she decides a corner belongs to her, the street learns she doesn't drop threads. She drags them. Jay is filed as an original, one of the early voices that made the boulevard feel alive instead of empty. The record treats him like foundational heckler energy, a street vendor of chaos who kept traffic moving by refusing to let any corner get comfortable. Even in the later pages, the hustle stays. The file talks about coin games and petty scams, less a police report, more a portrait of someone who can smell value and attention and trade it like street currency. Jay's White Cheese stamp is the grin you see right before the crowd realizes they've been played and laughs anyway. Dante's file is short and loud, a man who took instigation out of this city and onto wider avenues, lighting up political timelines until real-life doors reportedly shut behind him. Literal or exaggerated, the placement makes sense. White Cheese doesn't stop at borders, it dares the border to do something about it. The dossier also carries a side-eye, an implication that his energy comes with grime, that he's the kind of guy you don't casually clasp hands with. Not a verdict, just atmosphere. Dante is the boulevard's blaze of glory type, messy, memorable, and impossible to ignore when he's active. Cancer's file splits cleanly into then and now. In the heyday pages, he's described as a boulevard mirror, content on demand, Instigation on instinct, the kind of presence that could keep a corner loud for hours. The city remembers that version like a neon sign that used to work. In the newer pages, the tone turns comedic, less menace, more fumbling. The archive jokes about him getting stuck at the start screen of something simple, like the city watched his hands forget how to drive. Even that becomes part of the stamp. When a Boulevard figure loses momentum, the fall becomes a running story. Abuzark lands in the Boulevard file for one reason, a single piece of content that crossed a line and got remembered. The narrator admits they don't know him well, which is almost the point. Sometimes a person's entire city footprint is one reckless poster stapled to the wall. White cheese energy doesn't always mean charm. Sometimes it's provocation for its own sake. In his file, the city debates judgment more than craft. That's still influence, making people argue about where the boundary is, and watching the boundary redraw itself around your mistake. Moncayo's placement is basically the Boulevard shrug. Loud opinions, sharp edges, the kind of presence that feels like rage bait even when the person is perfectly nice to you in private. The file reads like a warning delivered with the grin cool until the wrong nerve gets pressed. What matters for this map isn't the exact takes, it's the instinct to deliver them like fireworks. Someone will get annoyed, someone will clap, someone will screenshot. That's white cheese territory. Social friction is entertainment, opinion is performance, the street fed by reaction. Cherri's file comes with that fake shock people use when they actually mean respect. The archive insists she had her own caliber of instigation back in the day, the kind that can get under your skin without needing to scream. Boulevard craft, knowing exactly where the room is sensitive. There's also that whiplash note mannerisms that don't match where she's from, like she adopted a dialect as a costume. In a city made of performance, that isn't accidental, it's camouflage, it's theater. It keeps people talking about her even when she's off screen. Larvis is filed as a regional variant of the Boulevard's ugliest habit, the instigator who mistakes shock for personality. The lore paints him loud enough to fill a thread and reckless enough to stain it. He wasn't just stirring pots, he was trying to make the room taste bitter so everyone had to react. The file compares him to other notorious mouths, framing it like a grotesque contest of who could push the line further. That's the part we keep at arm's length, not the words but the impulse. Larvis's white cheese stab is turning outrage into fuel until the street smells like smoke. Bork gets described with the kind of language people use when they don't want to say what they really fear. Instigators feels too small. The vibe is closer to disaster with a username. Exaggeration or not, the effect is clear. When Bork is around, people brace. White cheese territory isn't reserved for lovable entertainers. It's also where the city files pure agitators, the ones who know exactly which nerve to press and do it with clinical patience. Bork's dossier reads like that. Chaos delivered cold, peace refused on principle. Joe is a ghost in the modern skyline. An older file, referenced more than witnessed. The lore paints him as someone who scrapped in fast food back alleys with other notorious mouths. A figure whose job was to provoke frustration and keep the street reactive. The dossier also claims the account wore different faces, different names, different performances, like it was less a person and more a rotating role. And yet, one detail stays, the writing had teeth. That's why he belongs here. White cheese isn't just loud, it's articulate enough to cut you and make you thank it for the scar. Joe's legacy is the feeling of being baited by someone smarter than the bait deserves. The Boulevard hates that. The Boulevard also can't stop watching it. That tension, resentment welded to fascination is exactly where his file belongs, wedged deep in the instigator district's main artery. Duwang is the Boulevard's rare contradiction, a white cheese clone who can actually draw. The lore frames him as troll energy endless crude faces, humor that spreads because it's simple and relentless. But it's paired with something the Boulevard doesn't always grant, stability. The record even notes he found love, used as a punchline, but it lands his character. He's not only living for the street's attention, he's living alongside it. That makes him distinct chaos, delivered with a human anchor attached. Dern's file reads like anger with direction, not the aimless shouting of a tourist, more like a person who could be set off, then stay set off, as if the Boulevard lived under his skin. The record singles out a feud intense enough to become defining memory, the kind of grievance that turns a username into a siren. And yet, the map still stamps him here. Lust for status, desire to entertain through conflict, instinct to turn a random disagreement into a season-long storyline. White cheese isn't only comedy, it's power-seeking through commotion. Darn feels like someone who could have owned a corner if he'd built more than rage. The archive's question hangs on him like fog. What would this place look like if that volatility had been harnessed instead of spent? Maybe he'd be a district boss. Maybe he'd be a caution carved into the pavement. Either way, his file proves the Boulevard rewards heat, even when the heat burns the hand holding it. The Billy Shears district is the studio quarter where creation is emotional weather and impatience is a spark that can either light art or light drama. These are the people who feel too much, build too fast, and get bent by the room's temperature even when they swear they're in control. Seizure is filed as Billy's darker reflection, talent paired with mood swings, and an ego sharp enough to cut the hand that holds it. The lore doesn't pretend he's easy to like, it frames him as a storm that happens to paint. Yeah. In the studio quarter, that combination is common. What's rare is how consistently he stays at the center of it. The file crowns him best artist with a jab attached, but the point lands. He becomes the measure people compare themselves to, even while they complain about his personality. That's the Billy paradox, fragile and brilliant at the same time. In this city, artistry doesn't buy peace. Buys visibility, and visibility buys fights. F is the Billy district in human form, outward emotion, creativity that spills into everything, and a brittle relationship with pushback. The file frames him as someone who can dish smoke but struggles to stand in it. It's not a moral failing, it's the studio quarter curse. Sensitivity makes art. Sensitivity also makes bruises, but he's not just volatile, he's capable. The archive notes fun streams, neat concepts, and creative curiosity that keeps the studio quarter from turning into a complaint department. His beefs are part of the story, sure, but the deeper placement is momentum. F keeps making things even when the city makes him feel raw. Badass is the studio quarter's great contradiction. A man trying to look like stone while his insides are fireworks. The lore ties the entire personality map concept to his creative presence, proof that even the coldest facade can be built out of performance. He's described as a grudge holder too, which is the part people don't notice until the mask slips. That's not vault calculation, it's Billy emotion that ferments. He creates, he performs, he argues, he returns. The city sees armor. The archive sees a nerd with a pulse who can't stop making things because making things is how he breathes. On the map, his influence is stagecraft itself. The way the studio quarter learned to treat creativity like an event. Even when he's beefing, he's performing. Even when he's quiet, he's building. The city calls that contradiction badass. The archive calls it Billy, wearing armor. Green's file opens with debate, leader, or artist. The archive says he was initially stamped Jim because he can gather people, because he carries entourage energy like a portable spotlight. But the deeper record drags him toward Billy heat, creativity, constant output, the kind of drive that makes the studio quarter feel permanently under construction. He's framed his key inside a cult of personality circle teams and houses that treat certain names like banners. It doesn't have to mean tyranny, it can mean production. In this city, production is authority. People follow whoever keeps the lights on, and Green keeps the lights on through stubborn creation. His temper is the tax on that output creative impatience that can flare into conflict. That's why the stamp stays Billy. He's driven by feeling, not spreadsheets. He doesn't want order. He wants momentum. In the studio quarter, momentum is the closest thing to control anyone ever gets. Wildstrike's dossier is basically a countdown clock. The record paints him as someone who can be relaxed 1 minute, then suddenly close to snapping the next, depending entirely on how the room touches his nerves. That isn't boulevard arrogance, it's Billy mood with a fuse. The file frames his humor as a specific current. An inside flavor that can either charm a crowd or annoy it instantly. He makes weird edits, catches petty beefs, and carries permanent moment-to-moment energy. In the studio quarter, that isn't a weakness, it's a signature. Kale's file reads like a temperature chart. Earlier seasons, quick to get heated, quick to escalate, the kind of energy that turned rants into events. The archive points to one notorious rant as a missed championship moment proof that, at peak intensity, he can make the city stop and watch. Later seasons, different life, different rhythm. The file mentions raising a kid and posting weird memes on a quieter side street. That shift doesn't erase the Billy stamp, it completes it. Billy energy matures into soft absurdity when it survives long enough to calm down. Hitrule's dossier lives at the intersection of belief and performance. He loves debate, he loves expressing convictions, he treats a thread like a courtroom with the lights turned up. The archive also notes the temper moments where opposition doesn't just get answered, it gets felt. The file adds an important nuance. His placement is about creative passion and emotional velocity, not about matching anyone's ideology line for line. That's why he lands Billy. He makes arguments like art pieces, big, sharp, personal, and the city responds because it can feel heat in the brushstrokes. Joel's the kind of Billy who disappears when the street gets too loud. The file says he can get prodded, get heated, then dip for months like a light flicked off. That's not cowardice, it's sensitivity with boundaries. The studio quarter doesn't always have stamina for boulevard noise. Underneath the vanishing act is talent. The file respects strong writing, a slight arrogance about beliefs, and an ability to gather into squads when timing is right. That's the Billy stamp again, creative power paired with emotional fragility. Jole dominates by the page, then leaves before the crowd can demand an encore. The shitty Dokkan player sits in a weird middle space. The archive refuses to call it gray area, so it stamps him Billy for the creativity and lets the boulevard similarities stay in the margins. The record describes him as calmer than most, still capable of instigation, but ultimately driven by making things rather than burning streets down. The file implies a time shift, prime days versus current days, like his stamp would read louder back when the city was younger. Now he feels like a creative survivor, still here, still curious, not trying to be king of anything. In the studio quarter, that steadiness is rare and valuable. The ChillBro district is the cold vault under the city, where everything gets measured, ranked, and remembered. These are the analysts and schemers, the ones who can hold a grudge like a ledger entry and keep their face calm while the boulevard burns. Their power is organization, perception, and patience. The interviewer is an obvious vault resident, ranking obsessed presence so cleanly analytical that people almost laugh when they see the file. The lore even toys with placing him on the boulevard, as if a cube-headed sorter could be a loud instigator. But then you hear the tone polite maybe, yet hovering with superiority if you listen closely. He isn't necessarily hostile. The record admits most interactions were fine. The issue is the insinuation, the way a calm sentence can feel like a verdict. That subtle condescension is why he belongs here. He can drive people insane without raising his voice, simply by sounding like he's already done the math on them. His legacy is the kind of order that feels like judgment. ChillBro energy doesn't need cruelty to feel sharp. Sometimes it only needs a list, a ranking, and the calm certainty that you'll be placed whether you like it or not. Marie's file carries the smell of rigged games and long paragraphs organization used like a blade. She's described as snarky, judgmental, and deeply invested in mind games. That's ChillBro in a tailored outfit, belief that the city is a puzzle and other people are pieces you can move if you're clever enough. The archive points to a saga tangled with other names. Communication turned into a theatrical trial, strategy mistaken for intimacy, drama stretched into a labyrinth. We don't need the crude punchlines from the source to keep the meaning. When Marie wants something, she overcomplicates the route on purpose, because complexity is how she stays in control. Her territory is quiet satisfaction, being right in a room full of noise. She doesn't need boulevard applause, she needs vault certainty. If the city is a war of reputation, Marie is the lawyer drafting the treaty in a language only she fully understands. JJ doesn't fit the obvious mold at first glance. He talks smoke, sure, and apathy can look like boulevard energy, but the file insists on a colder reading. The way he speaks is too precise. You could cut through someone in a single line and leave them embarrassed in a way that feels surgical, not playful. That's why he's filed ChillBro, cold, abrasive perception. He doesn't even need to do much. The archive reads him as someone who can be an antagonist while barely moving, an intelligence that chooses stillness. In a city obsessed with performance, doing nothing on purpose is a flex. JJ's legacy is the reminder that cruelty can be efficient, not loud, not chaotic, just accurate. You can't outshout that kind of person. You can only hope they get bored and lead you alive enough to log off. Florina's dossier comes with a warning. If you only know the bit, you don't know the person. The archive claims there's something colder behind the performance, a depth that doesn't belong in leadership or boulevard showmanship. It belongs in the vault, perception paired with distance. She doesn't take herself as seriously as the archetype's namesake, according to the record, but she also doesn't drop the veneer easily. That's the ChillBro mark, controlled disclosure. When she does let something slip, it's sharp and strangely insightful, enough to make the city realize it was laughing at the wrong layer of the joke. Scav's file is thin on specifics but thick on vibe, schemer energy, careless posture, and a taste for grim art that makes the room uneasy. The record mentions drawings that go too dark for comfort, which is enough to understand the placement. ChillBro isn't always tidy. Sometimes it's the cold humor of someone who already pictured the worst outcome and found it funny. He isn't winging it, the archive insists. Even when he's shitposting, there's intent under the shrug, planning under the mess. In the territory map, Scav is the reminder that I don't care can be a costume for someone who cares enough to plot quietly for weeks. King Ag is filed here for personality, not competence. The archive frames him as pompous and self-impressed, someone who tried to operate like a mastermind while tripping over his own grandiosity. In the Vault District, arrogance is common. What makes him notable is how loudly he performed it. The file references a date and screenshot era vibe, how he talked, how he presented himself, how the act felt stale even in its moment. We don't need the quotes to get the stamp. King Ag wanted authority without the work, judgment without the insight. That's still ChillBro energy, the posture of superiority even when the math doesn't back it up. Joy's file reads like a plot that couldn't hold its own weight. The archive paints her as a schemer with an inflated view of her own subtlety, someone who tried to move people around the board and got exposed anyway. That's still a vault placement. Reputational warfare fought in whispers and DMs. The dossier refuses to glamorize it. It frames the collapse as the punchline. Someone who thought they were untouchable, discovering the city, loves watching confidence crumble. We keep it humane by staying general. No invented crimes, no recycled insults. What matters is the archetype stamp, the need to control, and the shock when people refuse to be pieces. The main character is filed as a mask that tried on everything. The archive calls it an invasion-era presence and a cocktail of every archetype: leadership swagger, boulevard mouth, vault arrogance, studio output, and then, randomly, ice cream softness. The result feels engineered to be discussed more than understood. The file suggests the coldest reading, not boulevard performance, but old-school vault disrespect, messy, abrasive, intentionally annoying. The bit eventually got old, which is the fate of anyone who tries to live as a mashup. The city can tolerate chaos, but it demands a core. Without one, you become noise. Roundabout is the file that starts with the narrator admitting they were wrong. Earlier notes tried to paint him as mellowed out, half promenade, a guy who reacts and chats about harmless hobbies. Then the DMs happened, and the city's tone changed from "he's fine now" to "watch the doors." The archive describes takeover thinking and alt-hunting someone who shows up with theories and talks like the city is a crime board. Whether those plans were real or just the thrill of imagining them, the effect is the same. People feel watched. ChillBro energy thrives on that analysis, turning into suspicion. Organization turning into obsession. He's filed as dangerous in the social sense, the kind of presence that can turn a community into surveillance culture. The dossier doesn't need to prove every rumor to show the pattern. He lives for the hunt. In a city built from screenshots and reputation, the hunt becomes its own territory, one that never closes for the night. If you want a clean moral, you won't get one. You'll get a fact of atmosphere. Once someone convinces you the city is full of hidden players, every shadow becomes a suspect. Round.about didn't just live in the Vault District. He turned the whole map into a locked room and made everyone hold their breath inside it. The Gary Promenade is the city's breathing space. It's the side streets, the friendly benches, the people who keep the vibe from turning into constant trench warfare. Gary energy doesn't need to dominate the scoreboard to matter. It matters because it's pleasant, quirky, and steady, because it makes others want to stay. Frank 2 is filed as the reason this whole promenade exists. The record frames him as the nicest kind of presence, someone who can simply be around without demanding the street's attention. That's Gary energy at its purest, making a community feel livable instead of survivable. The archive even admits they wanted to name the archetype after him but chose the older symbol instead. That's the compliment Gary's earned, becoming the template for pleasant. Frank Duo's territory isn't a district you conquer, it's a corner you return to when the scoreboard starts to feel like a spotlight that burns. YoDeadSon's file is simple, unbelievably chill, with just enough trash talk in the bloodstream to keep things interesting. He's described as a wingman who can follow a gym into any room and make the plan feel lighter. Gary energy doesn't lead, it enables, and that's underrated power. Thus, the archive drops a side joke about a named creature being evil, but we don't need the exact reference to get the vibe, playful darkness, humor that can bite without turning into a feud. In a territory war of reputations, YoDeadSon is the guy who keeps the crew smiling while the scoreboard screams. Ardia's dossier is brief but pointed, chill, fun to talk to, and absolutely not here for invasive questions. Gary energy often comes with boundaries like that. Pleasantness paired with a closed door. The city can be nosy. Ardia's file reminds you privacy is a right, not a rumor slot. She isn't filed as a leader or an instigator. She's filed as a stabilizer, someone whose presence feels normal in a city that treats normal like a myth. When the community is built from performance, a person who can just talk without turning it into a shell becomes a quiet luxury. Nally's file carries that original member glow, founder energy, early shitposter spirit, someone who arrived from another neighborhood and still made this place feel like home. The archive frames him as genuinely nice humor without cruelty, presence without pressure. The record says most people don't remember him now, which is how the city works. It forgets its builders while it argues about its newest fires. But the Gary stamp isn't about fame. It's about being the kind of person others hope is doing well somewhere off map, because remembering them makes the city feel less mean. Amy's file is written with restraint, because the archive admits the obvious: she was a kid. The city's personality stamps don't fit cleanly on someone still forming, so the record places her on the promenade by default. Not as a judgment, but as protection. Don't overassign, don't overinterpret. The file notes a little instigation, because kids poke at boundaries. That's part of learning the world. But it also calls her nice, and in a community that can be sharp, that might be the most important line in the whole entry. Sometimes the right move is to stop ranking and simply be kind. Cathy's dossier starts as normal, quiet lurker energy in a loud city. Then the file swerves into a burst of personal oversharing that makes the community go silent for a second, stunned that the back room got that intimate. The record doesn't frame her as malicious. It frames her as someone whose life bent hard and whose words came out sideways because of it. The archive pivots to her relationship choice, treating it like a baffling plot twist. Why that neighborhood? Why that fast? Why now? We don't need the crude lines from the source to keep the meaning. It's a story about a person seeking safety in the wrong district, mistaking attention for support, and getting pulled into boulevard weather during a fragile season. And then, quietly, the file resolves into Gary. She ends up chill. Not because the past was funny, but because she survived it and didn't turn into a villain on the way out. Cathy's placement is the reminder that gossip isn't a personality test, it's a storm. Some people get soaked and still walk away gentle. If the boulevard loves turning people into headlines, the promenade exists to undo that damage. Cathy belongs here because her story ends in steadiness. The territory map isn't only about who wins arguments, it's about who finds their footing again after the city tries to swallow them whole. CarBleeder's file is a kind of Gary entry that makes you grin mid-read, quirky humor, a distinctive vibe, and a presence that doesn't demand constant attention. She isn't in the city all the time, which might be why people notice the texture she adds when she is around. Her territory is humor that doesn't feel mean. In a community built on sharpness, that's a gift. The dossier doesn't beg for deeper analysis, it asks you to notice the relief she provides. Gary energy is seasoning that keeps the whole city from tasting like pure conflict. Zenon's dossier is almost entirely secondhand. Never met him, but he edits well and seems chill. In an oral history map, that kind of entry matters. Not everyone is a boss or a menace. Some people are simply competent names that drift through the skyline like satellites, useful, calm, not trying to own a district. That's why he lands on the promenade. The city doesn't need everyone to be loud. It needs steady hands, quiet talent, and people who don't turn every interaction into a battleground. Zenon's legacy is calm competence. You only notice when it's gone. Holy Warsend 2 gets filed as Gary despite the kind of focus that could have made her a leader, hours of niche streams, obsessive hobby energy, relentless schedule, but the archive's conclusion is clear, the vibe stays chill. Hyper-focus without hostility. Dedication without domination. That's Gary energy at its best, someone deeply into their thing without turning the community into a battlefield. The city needs people who can be intense about joy, not only intense about conflict. Her file reminds you passion doesn't have to be aggressive to be real. That's the territory map as the lore hands it to us. 5 districts, 49 files, and a community that keeps rebuilding itself out of the same handful of energies. The leaders raise towers, the instigators keep the streets loud, the artists turn feeling into neon, the analysts keep receipts in cold vaults, and the easygoing ones make the city worth living in. If you recognize yourself in any of these silhouettes, don't panic. The point was never purity, it was pattern. The city doesn't punish you for being a clone, it punishes you for pretending you aren't. Own your district, guard your back rooms, and remember the scoreboard isn't the whole skyline. It's just the loudest light.